Welcome to the Great Things LLC podcast, the show that celebrates people who are making an impact on the world, people creating conscious businesses that are in alignment with their own personal values. Each episode shares the wisdom, experience, and the intentions of those that are following their dreams. Visionaries who have chosen a different path, found their purpose, and create joy and abundance while helping others. Whether you're already a trailblazer or still searching for your path, these stories will inspire you towards being the best version of yourself. So today I'm excited to welcome Patty Upton and share her incredible journey and her story. So Patty, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
So Patty, let's dive in. And you've done something extraordinary, and you're sharing your story that you and Loren took an incredible adventure. And this adventure was over 56,000 miles over 5 years. And share a little bit with the audience of just the overall of the trip, where it went to, and we'll dive into how you got involved.
I finally got it all down in a nutshell. We went around the world and into the Guinness Book of Records. That's what we did.
That is the most concise thing I've heard. So you did this in, this was Loren's dream, and he wanted to do all this overlanding in an American-made vehicle.
Right. His dream was to take one American-made vehicle around the world on a north-south course. When you look at a globe, that's going to be your most land, less water. And he wanted to be able to stay entirely on land, except for the South Atlantic. That was being the only legitimate water barrier there was. And you, again, look at the globe. You've got a land route from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to the tip of South America, from the tip of South Africa to the tip of Norway. However, in between Panama and Colombia, there is no road that links the two countries together. There hasn't been a road. I don't think there's going to be one in my lifetime, probably not in my kids' lifetime. It's just a contentious area, and it's gotten more contentious. It's known as the Darien Gap, or El Tapón de Darien, and it's mountains, jungles, and swamps. And there's been a few vehicles that go through there. All of them except us have gone through by using a combination of trails and traveling by the rivers. Because you ask a native, how do I get from point A to point B? They say you get on the boat and you dug out and you go up the river or down the river, and that's it. That was not our option. Our option was to remain entirely on land.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big route. So let's start back at the beginning of the story. So Loren had attempted some of these trips in the previously, and at that point, let's start with you. You were living in Panama at that time.
Correct.
So you had met Loren on one of his previous trips, and let's start with the time that you heard he was back in town and how you got involved in this crazy adventure.
Well, he'd been through or into the Darien Gap on 3 previous attempts to make this goal of entirely on land. Those 3 attempts didn't work. One thing or another that didn't work out. It was his 4th attempt that he began in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska in '84, June 15th, 1984. He was on the Arctic Ocean at Prudhoe Bay. And he arrived in Panama, I'm going to guess sometime in October. And a friend said, oh, that guy that was going through the Darien's back. And the last time I'd seen him was probably sometime in early 78. Mid 78 or spring of 78 was probably the last time I saw him. I had no idea what he'd been doing, where he was, nothing. He doesn't really write letters. And as a result, I thought, oh, okay, where is he? And they said, well, he's out at the Jeep Club. So I went out to the Jeep Club, and he was there with his Jeep. He had a 1966 CJ5 Jeep on this trip. It's made by Kaiser. He kind of was reluctant to buy a brand new Jeep, as the past 2 Jeeps had been, because Renault had a big controlling interest in American Motors at that time, and he didn't feel it would be a truly American-made product with Renault's name in there. So he decided he'd go with an older Jeep. Besides, it had a great winch. It had a 9,000-pound, excuse me, Ramsey power takeoff winch on there. So that was kind of the big selling thing for that particular Jeep. And I, again, helped him organize stuff, places, things, papers, that sort of thing.
Okay. And Loren, just to educate everyone, was pretty much a purist and very, how would you describe him? He was very particular in his beliefs.
He would have been right at home during the Teddy Roosevelt era. He believed in a man's word was all the man was worth, and he said he was going to do this trip entirely on land, and he stuck to his guns and did it entirely on land. He was going to do it in one American-made vehicle, not a series of them. He did it in one American-made vehicle. He's always been a man that he doesn't demand your respect, but his persona kind of wants you to respect that. And he's very fair. He's very even-tempered. He's not a hothead, nothing like that. Even though he was 6'4", well over probably 225 pounds, 230 pounds, and he had a commanding presence for sure.
Okay.
And yeah, when he spoke, people listened.
Okay. And so you met him again here in the mid 80s, and he's now in Panama, and he's getting ready to make his fourth attempt. And at this point, there was an offering or an opening for you to join him for that.
He was looking for someone that would help or take photographs more than anything else. He's busy in the vehicle. He's the only one that's going to be in this vehicle once we get into the jungle portion. Anyone else is going to be out walking. He contacted his nephew Lawrence, who lived in the Spokane area at the time. He was young 20s, and he had just gotten out of the Army, so it was wintertime in Spokane. So yeah, why not get out of Spokane? So he came down and was with his uncle. He hadn't seen his uncle. He doesn't even remember meeting his uncle in his lifetime. This was his really first recollection of meeting him, even though that Lauren says, no, we met when you were about 5 years old. So he had his nephew with him. So that was really good because it takes two good English-speaking people that can communicate with each other when you've got the winch going and you've got someone in the vehicle. Someone's got to be out there watching to make sure that winch is spooling properly, isn't bunching up on one side, snap a cable, whatever. And Lauren just never felt he could really he doesn't speak Spanish. So putting a native out there who has no clue, of course, what a winch is, let alone what he's doing. So not having that communication. So he had to have a gringo out there in front of the vehicle. So that was Lawrence's job. And that left me with wanting to do the photography work as best I could. It wasn't that I did I did the photography work, yes, but I mean, if other hands were needed for running cables, hooking cables, unhooking cables, you name it, everybody did something at certain times.
Okay, great. And so what was the offer he extended to you? You're in Panama, he's getting ready to go. So it was a short-term offer, correct?
Right. At the time, we thought it was going to be 30 days. I mean, he'd been into the Darien Gap on 3 previous trips. So he actually crossed it in 77 in 49 days. And he did about 10 miles strapped atop 2 dugout canoes up the Atrado Swamp because the rains had come. So it wasn't an all-land crossing. And that really bugged him. Well, 2 weeks later, he lost that one over a cliff in Ecuador. So that put an end to that trip. So yeah, he said, it may be 30 days, maybe a little bit longer. We're not sure. And I said, okay, I can arrange to take 30 days off of work. I'll, without pay, have someone take care of my job for me. The bookkeeper come in and do it full time. Had my daughter taken care of, no problems there, nothing on my social calendar, everything was taken care of. And I really made sure all these things were done before I said I can go, because I knew I would lose a lot of respect from Lauren if I said, I want to do this, I want to go. And then when the day came to leave, if my butt wasn't in the seat because of some fluke that came up that unless it was a limb missing, then he might have forgiven that. But I mean, he's just that type of person you don't want to let down. And as a result, I didn't want to let him down. So I made sure everything was taken care of, had a good camera, had my equipment as far as that goes, had what I needed to take care of me. And I said, I'm going. And we thought we were going to do it in 30 days. That was a pipe dream.
Yeah. So, for clarification, 30 days was the initial estimate, but
Right.
it took slightly longer than that. How long did the actual process take?
From the end of the road in Panama at the town of Yavisa till we reached the beginning of a road in the town of Rio Sucio, Colombia, was 41 days, 741 days. And we traveled 125 miles.
Yeah, I
So
can't do the math off the top of my
I
head,
know,
but that's not a lot of miles per day.
no. And there's 2 rainy seasons in there where we didn't move. The first rainy season caught us at the village of Pukeru, and Loren made arrangements with the chief of the village that he could camp near the village. And he stayed there in the Jeep for the 9 months of the rainy season. And as he termed it, watch the bananas grow and the rains fall.
And during this time, so you were with him for a while. You did return home for a brief stint, but when did you go back and when did you rejoin with Loren?
Well, when we did the first 30 days, realized we were not there's a national park that was created in Colombia that created a problem to his 3rd expedition. And that created a problem to the point where like he says, it was a poor choice of words. A Colombian park official, again, a man is as good as his word. The park official said, you need permission from the head office in Bogota to go through the park. Loren says, okay, fine. 11 days it took him to go by trail, boat, larger boat, bigger boat, bus, another bus into Bogota. Walked into the office. The guy says, here, take it. You got permission, go. No problem. Repeat that all the way back out there. Rains are now coming. It's getting close to rainy season. Loren's getting a little frustrated with all this political nonsense. Can't find the park official to give him the letter that has been signed by the head office. And he gets back out to the Jeep, and like 2:00 in the morning, he made the guys pull all night. Got out there, or 6:00 in the morning, got everyone up. We're going, we're moving. We got to get up this hill. We've got to get miles going because the rains are coming. Well, the park official comes up and says, wait, you can't go, you can't go. And Loren says, I've got the permission here. Let me get to the top of the hill. So Loren gets to the top of the hill and reaches for the paperwork to give to the park official. And the park official says, no. And Loren then realizes the guy wants money. And this was Loren's, like you say, sometimes he could get his mouth going. He said, it's going to take more than you and your gun to stop me. Park official said, fine. Came back the next day with more men and more guns. As a result, Loren saw his point of view. He and his men got out. Jeep was left to the jungle. So we knew this national park was there. We wanted to see if we could find a way to skirt around it as much as possible so that we could avoid a repeat performance, because we couldn't get permission. We tried again to get permission from the park officials and in Colombia, and they wouldn't give it to us. So we said, okay, then when we get to the border, we're going to go in a different direction that has never been before and see if we can get around the park. And when we got to Pukeru, rains were going to be coming. Rainy season was fast approaching. So Loren says, we're going to stay here. I went back to my job in Panama City. Lawrence went back to his job in Spokane. I'd send supplies down by the missionary pilot that would fly into the little grass landing strip every 6 weeks. And Loren stayed there for 9 months. I worked for 9 months, and then I arranged again to go back down there in the beginning of dry season of 86. And we started out again. I had my cousin and his brother-in-law with us. They were with us for about 2.5 weeks because they had jobs in Miami they had to get back to. It was just kind of a lark, spur of the moment type thing for them. They enjoyed it, but I still say they do speak to me, so that's a good thing. So then we were out again for, I think it was 37, maybe close to 40 days that second dry season in there. And we broke both rear axle shafts. So at that point we were down and down hard, but we were out of the national park, or if whatever, because we were no longer in just jungle. We were in little farms. There were little individual farmers there with little corn crops and stuff like that. So we ended up taking out the entire axle house, or the entire rear end, the whole axle housing, everything. put it on mule, went out by mule, went out by boat, went out by larger boat, again, bus to Medellin where it was left. We had permission to bring in new axle shafts, and that was it. So Loren said, okay, I'm going to go back to California and I'm going to work, get the axle shafts. I was going back to my job in Panama City. Well, I got back to my job in Panama City and found out that they were going to phase out my position. I worked for the USA Girl Scouts in Panama. And because of the treaty with Torrijos, the Carter-Torrijos treaties, they were going to an all-volunteer office staff. And I said, well, volunteering is nice, but that's not what I need to do. I need to have an income. I went ahead and, I worked till probably beginning of July. And then the office was closed. And I said, see you later. I think this is what I want to do. And I went back to the States, and Loren then asked me if I wanted to go full time. And I said, not yes, but hell yes. And we went back down in dry season 87 and took in, he brought in the axles from the Colombian side. I hiked through from the Panamanian side. I'd flown down to Panama with some other parts. I had driveline, gear shift, and I don't know, probably a couple of U-joints and a few other things. And then I hiked through with natives to where the Jeep was and left everything I had there, met him in the town of Turbo in Colombia, picked up gas and a new battery and went back out there. He had the axle shafts already in the housing and fired her up, and she probably ran on 5 of her 6 cylinders, but she started right up.
That's amazing. Yeah, carrying the parts in, like in this country, we're so used to the convenience of being able to get parts. And
Yes.
being an American-made vehicle, they probably didn't have many. There's no parts store. There's no
Right.
auto parts stores. So you literally carried
Right.
the remainder of the parts in.
Yeah.
So you're up and running. And from this point now, where are you and what's happening next? You're getting into South America at this point?
Well, yeah, we went out on mule actually before we started the Jeep. Before we started moving the Jeep, that third dry season in there in '87, we went out on mules to kind of scout out, because we're now in an area that's known as the Atrado Swamp. And this area, when you look at a map, sure enough, it's indicated as a swamp, but it's only a swamp during the major rains of the season. I mean, so you want to get there towards the end of the rainy season, to tend to the end of the dry season, because then it leaches out. Because we went through there in mules, and there was 18 inches of water standing in some places. And when we got there with the Jeep, it was like 18 inches of mud, but it wasn't with water standing over it. So it was a different, what do you call it? The curveball thrown at us with having to deal with more mud and flatter terrain for sure. And which also was not the best, because sometimes there weren't a lot of trees around to winch to. So yeah, it was a little bit, again, a slow going, following some logging roads that they were punching through with big pieces of equipment. But if you've ever been on any type of a trail that's mud, that's now dried, that was put in there when it was wet by those big pieces of equipment, you're talking ruts 2 and 3 feet deep. So it was almost better if we weren't following the roads that these pieces of equipment put through there, because they were so rough and so hard to travel on.
Right. You can get hung up on those. And there were previous expeditions that had tried that part of the swamp. And I believe you said that you were told that, like, you can't get through it, and they were there in the rainy season.
Correct.
But
We were
you
told by
sludged
members.
through.
Yeah. We were told by members of one expedition that went through in 79, and with, I think it was 4 or 5 Jeeps, and American Motors sponsored that one. They came from south to north, and which Colombia to Panama. And I say south to north because if you look at a map, it's actually east and west. So yeah, you have to really know your geography, but most people think, okay, South America, south. Well, at that point, it's actually east. But so south to north from Colombia to Panama. And they got there, of course, at the beginning of the dry season. So the swamp was still full of water. I mean, there was no real dry land for them to travel on. So they said there is no dry land route through the Atrado. Well, yeah, there is. We found one, but we went from the other direction, finding it at the tail end of that dry season. So we were very fortunate to do that. We were able to find that route. We had good guides. We had men working for us. We didn't know where we were. We were lost the whole time. If it wasn't for our guides, then yeah, we'd still be down there going in circles.
Yeah, mid
Um,
80s, there's no GPS. The maps are probably outdated and
oh,
there's no markers or road signs. So you were
right.
completely out
The
in.
maps were totally useless. The ones from the Panamanian government put out, they figured, well, we don't know really where the town of Basal is, so we'll put it on both sides of the Tweeder River. That way, one of them will be correct. They were within reason probably where they were, but they just put Basal on both sides of the river. So then there were some maps that Loren had gotten from the military. They were maps used by pilots. And there were just blank spaces. I mean, just white. They were topographical maps, which was great. But then there was just these blank white spaces in there, like they had no idea was there. I just kind of put a little sticky note there, and I said, "There be dragons," because nobody, they were from pilots' point of view, and they had no idea it was actually there.
Wow. So starting in Colombia, let's go through the trip of South America because there's some great experiences that you shared in there. But what was the rest of the route like from Colombia south?
It was reasonably good. It was good roads. When I say good roads by South American standards. We're not talking roads here in the States by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, we stayed on the Pan American Highway most of the time. We got off an occasion on side trips and stuff.
So you're ready to go. You're setting back out from Colombia, and the rest of the trip, you mentioned will probably be on some roads. Share what happened share what happened going on further south in South America.
Other than being a wonderful experience with the country and the people and finding places to camp and meeting people, farmers that we'd find a farmer and say, can we camp on your farm tonight for just so that we're safe? And they'd always give us permission. And then we had one time the farmer came out with the next morning we were getting ready to leave. He had a bag of green beans he had picked, and he's giving us a bag of green beans. And I mean, these people are literally, subsistence farmers. We've got more right there in the Jeep than they probably have, but they're giving to us. And it was just so heartwarming to meet these people and talk with these people. To me, that's what made the trip, was the people that we met. Breaks went out in Santiago, Chile. Not Santiago, no, further up. Oh, I can't remember the name of the town. Further up than Santiago, still in the desert portion of Chile. And not completely out, just we knew we were having problems with them. And Loren just happened to pull into the right little hole in the wall, fix-it shop. Young man in there, spoke no English. He said, yeah, he can fix them. And he worked for several hours. And finally, his wife came down to the shop to find out why he wasn't home for dinner yet, and realized that we were still in the process of bleeding the brakes. I was inside pumping, and he was underneath doing the bleeding part. Again, not really speaking Spanish that well. It was kind of a difficult situation. She says, here, let me help. And she gets in the Jeep and she pumps and he's bleeding the brakes. They didn't want anything. They did not want, he worked for probably 3 or 4 hours on the Jeep. Didn't want pay. He just wanted to be a part of the trip. Because again, we could talk to them. Our Spanish is not perfect. We could talk to them and tell them what we were doing. We have a world map that we've painted on the rear side windows, both sides of the Jeep, so we've started with a red line through the yellow map showing where we've been so far. So he just wanted to be a part of something. And we got to Santiago, Chile, and had to hold up because we needed to find transportation across the Atlantic. We were looking at a huge, probably close to $6,000 bill to get across the Atlantic Ocean for the Jeep and the two of us. Plus, we were going to be without our house for 30 days. Again, you just turn down the right road at the right time, and big farms just north of Santiago. And this farmer was growing seeds that he sells to the States. And he said, I've got an old house on the farm that my workers aren't using anymore. You're welcome to that. We didn't have running water, but had a well. We said, great, we'll take it. So we stayed in this little, concrete house, 1-bedroom, bathroom type thing with a well. And it was cold. It was wintertime, or getting close to wintertime. So we did get a big bottle of propane so that we could run our little stove in the house and cook and heat it a little bit. And I started knocking on doors of shipping agencies in Santiago, and finally they said, well, we found one that was called the Ian Taylor Shipping Agency. He said, well, call us back in a few weeks and we'll let you know. So we went ahead and took off for further south, went as far south in Chile as we could go at that time. Now there's roads way further south in Chile. We crossed over at Bariloche into Argentina, and then down through Argentina, and to arrive at Ushuaia is on the island of Tierra del Fuego. Well, we were on Punta Arenas. There we go, Punta Arenas. That's as far south, well, that's the town. But we found out that the Pope had been there, I don't know, several weeks before and visited a Boy Scout camp that was a little bit further south. So we took off and we just kind of asked questions. They said, oh, yeah, you can drive. And we kept driving. Finally came to a point where there was no more road. And we were literally on the Straits of Magellan there. And that's what we considered the end of the road on the South American continent. It was about 20 some miles south of Punta Arenas, Chile. We had called the Ian Taylor agency, and they said, well, we've got free transportation for you, Loren, and the Jeep across the Atlantic. And that was just like the biggest relief at that point. Loren was afraid we were going to have to go to ground once we got to South Africa and then go to work somewhere. So by having this opportunity of having them foot the bill for us to get across the Atlantic, it was just a lifesaver. So Loren said, well, most people consider the island of Tierra del Fuego the tip of South America, and Ushuaia the southern, well, it is the southernmost town. But you can't drive there, at least when we were there. I don't know that there's a bridge yet. No, it wouldn't be because it's over the Straits of Magellan. So yeah, you have to take a ferry across the Straits of Magellan, water barrier. But since we already achieved the goal of remaining entirely on land, going just south of Punta Arenas, we went ahead and splurged and went to as far south as we could on the island of Tierra del Fuego. The roads down there were pretty rough. It was cold. It was wintertime. We had some snow. We had some really rough dirt roads that were just potholes, just filled with water. They were little. We actually the rear bumper the weld started to break, and we found a place in Santiago when we got back up there that would repair it for us.
Yeah. What's really amazing about this story is how radically self-reliant that you all were. You know, today we have GPS, we have maps, we have all the conveniences, but back then, and undertaking a trip of this magnitude, you can't really plan for this. You had to you showed up every day and figured out what was in front of you for the next mile or the next 2 miles.
Right.
Like that part of the story is what's just really inspiring to me. Now, you said moving on to South America, the other part of the story is you guys didn't undertake this with massive corporate sponsorship. You would work as you pay your way. This was almost entirely self-funded.
Right. My husband was a carpenter, worked heavy construction, started out building houses and that sort of thing. Eventually worked on freeway overpasses, but he was not an engineer. He was not a supervisor. He was out there with his tool belt on, just like all the other guys. He may have had a crew under him, but he was out there with his tool belt on. I was a secretary. So yeah, this is what I try to tell people is you have to prioritize the things you want in your life. It doesn't take massive amounts of money and storehouses full of equipment and that sort of thing to do something like this. All it takes is something in here and something in here. You get those two working and you can make it work. That's all it takes. We've always said determination, patience, and a little bit of money go a long way.
And good people along the way certainly make the trip magical. And so you happened to find, through your efforts and knocking on the doors, you got passage to South Africa. So right. Take us across the ocean and into South Africa.
The trip across the ocean was not without its interesting parts. We hit two, what they call force 9 storms. I think they only go to 11 on the Beaufort scale. So 9's pretty much up there. I don't ever want to go to sea in a ship any smaller than that freighter that we were in, for sure. and it was by no means a small ship. But yeah, it was not fun for probably a good day and a half, 2 days when the first storm hit, and it hit at night. And the Jeep was actually loaded on board and tied down to a cargo hold, cargo hatch up on the bow of the ship, and there were some containers tied down next to it. And he went up to the bridge and he says, "Can you guys turn on lights out there? I want to see if the Jeep is still out there." Because they had told us that every now and then when they do hit some of these storms, these containers can be just washed overboard. The cables just snap and wash them overboard. So they've turned on the floodlights, and there the Jeep was, still sitting there, tied down as tight as she could be. And second storm was also, it was several days later, further out. And they had told us that the South Atlantic in August was the roughest. And yeah, it is. I don't know what it is any other time, but it certainly was pretty rough when we crossed. And it was 30 days from the time we left Talcahuano, I believe was the name of the port in Chile, where we loaded and went down through the Straits of Magellan and across to South Africa. And got to South Africa, and it was nice because we were now in a country that at least English was spoken more widely, because it was still under the apartheid government. So the Afrikaans, and they were in power. So the Afrikaans language was still the government language. So, but anything else, it was mostly English, which was at least something for us that we could deal with a little easier. Getting through customs and immigrations there was, I don't think it took us too long at all, just a few hours to get the Jeep loaded and out off the dock and everything. Took her to a place that we could get her steam cleaned and steam cleaned the heck out of her because she just swallowed I don't know how much salt water. And then we made a phone call, and to a acquaintance of my sister's from many years prior to this, she had met a South African man backpacking through the Mediterranean when she was backpacking through the Mediterranean, and they had kept in touch. And he said, "Well, I'm married now, I got a family, but, have your sister call me when they get here." So I called, and his wife answered. She says, "We're expecting you. My sister's expecting you. You're going to stay there that night. Then you're going to come here, and you're going to stay here. We've got the bed made up. You've got Kyle's room," and just went on. And it's like I knew her all my life. I don't know who this person is. Yet these people, they opened their house to us. We were there 3 or 4 days. They says, "Oh, we have to go away this weekend. Do you mind feeding the goats and the chickens and the pigeons and the silkworms?" And I forget whether there animals there were that we had to feed. "We're just going to be gone for the weekend." They walked off and left, their house with complete strangers. But no, it was family at that time.
I bet you were very welcoming to being on steady land in a restful bed at that point.
Yes, we were very much so. It was nice to not have something moving under us because, no, I'm not a sailor. I can remember years ago I read Robin Graham, I think, was the author of, he was at that time, I think, the youngest solo sailor around the world. This was back in the 60s. And I thought, I want to do that. Wow. Boy, am I glad I didn't follow that dream.
That's great. So did you stay in South Africa there long, or did you get on the road pretty quickly?
We were in South Africa for about 6 months, traveling in South Africa. We had some axle problems again. We'd gone to free-floating axles in the Darien Gap. But we've taken a Jeep that's made for 2 people and an ice chest to go out for a weekend. And we carry spare parts. We carry everything, including a kitchen sink. I mean, granted, it's not like we carry a lot of frivolous stuff. Everything did double duty. I mean, the dish pans were the dish pans, the bathtubs, you lined them with a plastic bag, you drained the oil in them. I mean, it was just multiple things had to be used that way because you don't have the room. But all that adds up. And we were extremely heavy. And yeah, we broke we had axle problems there in South Africa, had them fixed, had them new ones sent in. We had new hubs. We had a hub flange on them. And it was actually the hub flange was stripping out. The axles weren't breaking, but this hub flange was of like a weakened metal. And if it started to slip too much, then that hub flange would, the tongue and groove, or whatever you want to call it, it's not tongue and groove, that's carpenter. The splines would not line up. So yeah, it would strip it out. So we actually had new hub flanges sent, and we had them taken to a place in South Africa, and they heat treated them for us to make them a little harder. So that helped. Then we traveled over into Southwest Africa, Namibia, into the Kalahari. We went through Kimberley. We just did a lot of sightseeing because we had saved money coming across the country, and we weren't spending that much money there. It was fairly inexpensive travel. So we just thought, we're not going to get back to this part of the world. We're going to take advantage of it. And yeah, we spent 6 months, traveling through game park over in the Etosha Pan to see the animals, Kalahari, also some of the big animals, and really, really enjoyed it. Went through the gold mining district up outside Johannesburg, kind of west of Johannesburg, had a tour of not the deepest mine. There was still one, we were down a mile into the earth, and there was still another mine that was below where we were. These mines, it's not acres on the top of the surface of the earth, it's cubic volume type stuff. So yeah, we were down a mile in this gold mine, and then there was still another gold mine deeper than we were. And
what an experience. Moving up through there was a place, because you were going towards, where were you looking to do the land crossing at?
Only Egypt. You can only cross at Egypt. Everywhere else, I mean, that's the only place that Africa touches the science. Well, and actually it's the Suez Canal is there, but there's a tunnel under the Suez Canal. We didn't know if it was a tunnel or a bridge. We knew that we could get across the Suez Canal at some point without having to take a ferry boat. Most people that travel overland at that time, they were all Europeans, and they were coming from the south. So they were coming from the north going into Africa, and they'd go down through Spain, and then they'd cross it through Gibraltar and into Morocco or over to Tunisia, and ferry boats were running there all the time. Well, that's a water barrier that isn't legitimate. Only Egypt was where we could go.
So leaving South Africa during the apartheid, there were definitely some political things that were a surprise to you, and there were travel restrictions. So moving north on your trip, leaving South Africa, what did you run into?
Having been in South Africa under the apartheid government, we couldn't come up through what East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya area because of the apartheid government in South Africa. So we were kind of regulated. We had to go through the center of Africa. We went into Botswana and Zambia. Both of those countries have relations with South Africa, so we had no problems there. When we got into Zambia, we went to the U.S. Embassy and had to get new passports from the U.S. Embassy there because of the stamps that were in our passport entering South Africa. So we got fresh passports in Zambia. And then from Zambia, it was into Zaire. And Zaire was a real eye-opener because it was a sad, sad state. I mean, it really was. I mean, Mobutu Sese Seko was in power, and he was one of the richest men in Africa, and his country was one of the poorest. And it was really sad. And when we went to Lubumbashi, to the U.S. consulate there, we walked into the U.S. consulate and we talked to them. We said, look, we've got these U.S. passports that we need to send back to the States. They said, well, we can't do that. We said, what do you mean you can't do that? We've done that before through other U.S. Well, we can't do that. We said, okay, then we'll have to take them down to the Lubumbashi post office and send them through the local mail back to well, you can't do that. We said, we're not going to go through the rest of Africa with U.S. passports on us that have South African stamps. So what are we going to do? And we went back and forth, and they wouldn't budge. And we literally turned around, walked out, and in the waiting room, Loren probably got a little loud. There was an Air Force colonel out there. He said, give them to me. I'll put them in my pouch and send them back. And sure enough, he did. I mean, it was just, again, people are just fabulous. And some of them aren't, but are frustrating, but especially those in government positions.
Yeah. Well, that might be the one universal truth that you've discovered is all government bureaucracies are not fun to deal with.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, for sure. And so then it was through Zaire, and Zaire was it was all four-wheel drive. There were no real roads. There were no bridges. Bridges had all been, I mean, there were logs across where there had been bridges because there were concrete abutments and everything else, and they just have logs now laying on top of them. or there were no bridges and you just had to ford the river. It was red clay mud, terrible, terrible stuff. And it was just keep on plugging. We were, again, overloaded. So we had a tendency to break springs a lot. And I think Loren got real good at changing springs fairly quickly. But he was replacing them with someone else's discards. We'd find a town, go to the town dump, and he'd go through the discards there and find the best ones that he could find that might fit the Jeep. And that was what we used. And from Zaire, it was into the Central African Republic. And that's where most people then would continue north through the Sahara towards Morocco or Algeria. Well, because of our goal to get to Egypt, we had to go through the Sudan. So we turned east and went into the Sudan and went through the northern part of Sudan. And again, another extremely sad country because they were at war when we were there, and they're still at war. And we were there in 1987, early 88, 1988. So
now,
there's a country that's really sad.
And somewhere along this, Patty, this is to the point where you got sick on the trip for a little bit and got taken down with malaria.
Yeah. I think it was we had run out again. It was taking us longer to get through Africa than we had anticipated, or through, Africa once we left South Africa. It was a total of 6 months from the time we left South Africa to the time we reached Cairo. And it was just a little bit longer trip than we had anticipated. And our anti-malarial pills had run out several weeks prior. And I came down with malaria and amoebic dysentery, which I didn't know what I had. I just knew that I was very, very sick. And we stopped at one little construction. It was a Greek construction camp of some sort. And they put us up for a few days. I drank lots of water. They took me down to the clinic in town and they gave me a liter of IV. Stayed with them at the camp for a day or two, and then I felt better, and I said, well, let's go. And we took off, and it was like a day and a half later, and my fever came back, and I was just pretty much out of it. I don't have a lot of recollection of what happened. I had to read Loren's journals to find out what was going on. The Jeep is made up, or we can make the inside of the Jeep up for us to sleep in. Going through the Darien Gap, I slept in the Jeep every night. I mean, that was the Taj Mahal as far as I was concerned. It had mosquito netting and everything. Well, he could make the bed up for me to sleep in while he was driving. So that's what he did. Because again, we're doing this. It's summer, June, late May. So it was pretty hot. And when we left the Greek construction camp, they gave him a business card of their head office in Khartoum. So when he got to Khartoum, he found a park, city park, town park, parked in some shade, left the Jeep open, and got a taxi and said, take me to this place, and gave him the business card. And he says, okay, now you wait here for me because I don't know where the Jeep is. So you've got to stay right there. And the guy said, okay. So he went up and talked to the people in the office. They said, okay, well, let's go get her. So they came down and followed the taxi back to where the Jeep was. And then they took me to a small clinic, not the hospital, a small clinic in Khartoum. And that's where I was admitted. And then the test showed that it was malaria and amoebic dysentery. And I was there for, I think, 3 days while they gave me it's just an overdose of the anti-malarial pills for the malaria. And then we just started making our preparations for going north through Sudan at that point, because now we're in Khartoum. So now we're headed north to Egypt. And that's another whole.
Yeah, this part of the story is what really just blew my mind. So you had, I don't know if it's even fair to call it an adventure, but this was an interesting part of the trip. You said this was one of the harder parts.
Yeah, this is the one that it was the trouble with life-threatening situations is they're anticlimactic because you've lived through them. But this was truly what I would consider the only life-threatening situation that we were ever faced with. We had taken off out of Khartoum. Again, looking at a map, the Nile makes a big loop. and you cut across this part of the desert from Khartoum up to, I think it's the town of Dongola, which is on the river. So you avoid this big loop. And it's a well-traveled route. There's tea houses along the way, buses, trucks. Dongola is a big town. So there's a lot of traffic along there. Not a problem. We had to check in with the police in Dongola. Most of these third world countries, you always had to check in and out with the security police of just about every town you went through. Did that, and then we started up the west side of the Nile River, and we had no GPS. That was not something that was available. In fact, the only compass we had no longer worked. So we knew that the Nile River, we had to keep the Nile River to our right, to our east, because we knew that that was our water source. Because again, this is late June, we got to have water. And it was also our direction to travel. We knew it was going to go to Egypt, and that's where we were going. All we had to do is follow the river. We just, and when you look at it, by this time, it's not making any of these big loops, but it's not perfectly straight either. And we were doing really well. It was hot, very hot. In fact, at one point, I think he turned the heater on to pull some heat away from the engine. But we were several days out of Dongola, and we broke an axle shaft. The terrain had gotten real rocky and had come right down to the river's edge. So we had to swing around this big rocky outcropping to get around it because there was no way to go between the river and this rocky outcropping. Well, when we swung around, we got into some really soft sand and we broke an axle shaft. And we had already used the spare shaft that we had with us. So we knew we were down and down bad because at that point, the last human we'd seen was 45 miles back, and it was like a 10-year-old kid with 2 goats or something. And so we had no idea where we were. We didn't know where the Nile River was because we had made this big swing to the west. And so we just were, the first night was probably one of the roughest nights I can ever remember because I was a total basket case. And Loren, being the person he is, says, okay, what we need to do is we need to sit down and we need to make a list of everything we need to take out of the Jeep and take with us. We don't know how we're leaving yet, but we know we are going to be leaving the Jeep. So I need you to make a list of everything you think we need to take, from pencils to papers to journals to passports, everything. So he said, we're not going to talk about it. You just make your list. I'll make my list. And then when we're done, we'll compare our lists and see what we got. So we did that. And I know now that that was just a calming effect that he was having and putting my mind out of taking it out of the negative space that it was in and putting it into a constructive part and get it working. And when we compared the lists, I think the only thing he had that I didn't have was the inside rear view mirror. He was going to pop that off and take that as a signaling device. So now we had our lists. So things were pretty calm. And he says, I'll hike up to that mountaintop, that rocky outcropping, and I'll see what I can see tomorrow. So he did. Found out the Nile River was probably about a mile from where we broke down. There wasn't a person, anything that even indicated a person had ever been out there. There was nothing. There was nothing like a rock hut, house, a farm, nothing. It was just desert and a big river. And then he hiked down to the river and found that it had a current. So we knew we weren't far enough north to be on Lake Nasser. So we knew that we were still in Sudan and that there was still a current. And we also knew that the village of Wadi Halfa was north. And we knew from Wadi Halfa we could get a train back to Khartoum. So our goal was to get from where we were to Wadi Halfa. We had no idea how far it was. He said, well, the river's going to be our best mode of transportation. So he secured the Jeep into some brush that was there. And using a tin drawer that's in the back of the Jeep that's probably 32 inches long by 11 inches high and 17 inches wide, he sealed the seams. And then he used some tamarisk branches he cut. And then we had a bunch of jerry cans, plastic jerry cans to carry extra gas. He put all the gas in the tanks of the Jeep, turned the jerry cans upside down, lashed them to this. So we had an outrigger on either side. And then all of our supplies went into this tin box. It was, the cooking pot, the food, the water container, the halogen pills to purify the water, everything, important papers, clothing, whatever we could fit in a 32-inch by 17-inch by 11-inch box. And then he inflated the spare tire inner tube that we had, which I'm going to take a little sidetrack right here because so many people nowadays think, well, that's no big deal because everyone's got compressors nowadays. No, not everybody had compressors. What we had was old school, of course. You removed a spark plug, you screwed this into the spark plug socket, and then you put it on your tire and turned your engine on, and the air compression would pump a tire up. So that was our method for pumping tires. We still have it, still works. It's one of those things that, I mean, duct tape will fix it if it breaks. So there's nothing much to go wrong. But anyway, blew up the inner tube, tied that with a long rope to the raft. We got in the river. We held on to the inner tube of the raft. We were not above the water. And we floated down the river the rest of that day, got out that night, made camp, cooked beans, cooked rice, boiled water for drinking. And you'd lay there at night and you'd listen. You'd almost strain your ears to see if you could hear a dog bark or a chicken or a baby cry. No, nothing.
Just a total isolation.
Total. Not even, there was virtually nothing out there. I mean, there may be a few birds, but there was no wildlife. There was no vegetation. I mean, it was all just rock, really. It was just kind of gravelly rock. It wasn't a pretty desert as far as deserts go. The next day, we got in the river, started out again. We got in a little early. We thought, we'll get an early start. Found out that you can get close to getting hypothermia when it's 120, when the air temperature is 120 degrees. And that river is so cold and the water was moving so fast that I got to the point that I said, I can't do it. I got to get out. I am shaking so hard, I couldn't focus. My eyes were no longer focusing. My hands were going numb. My feet were tingling. I said, I got to get out. Get out. We'd build a fire. We'd cook hot tea, warm up, get back in the river, go another few hours, and then I'd say, that's it, got to get out. I've got to warm up, get out, build a fire, have some hot tea, and do it again. I mean, hypothermia at 120-degree temperatures, but yeah, close to it.
It doesn't take much cool water to chill the body, just those few degrees.
No. And you're in it, and you're completely submerged. The only part of your body that's not in the water is really your hands maybe and your head. Everything else is in the water. And water sucks the oils out of your skin like nothing. And it was the third day, halfway through the third day, we saw a white cone tent on the east bank. We made our way over there. And through broken English and sign language, we found out that this guy's produce was going to be picked up that night by a truck and taken into Wadi Halfa, which was maybe about an hour or so by road away. We said, can we get a ride? They said, sure. So we stayed there and waited for this truck to come in, and then got a ride into Wadi Halfa. And from there, we knew we could get that train back to Khartoum. And got back to Khartoum. And again, nothing is easy. Nothing is simple. You can't just pick up the phone and make a long distance call. You don't have one in your pocket you can pull out. The only place you could make an international call in Khartoum was at the Hilton Hotel. So we went down to the Hilton Hotel, called my mother, got her answering machine. And it took several times for them to try to get the call to go through. Finally, her answering machine answered, and I was able to get a message on the answering machine that we will call you tomorrow night at this time, at your time, this time, whatever time it is in Seattle right now, that's what time we're going to call tomorrow, or begin calling. And we will continue to begin calling or try calling for 2 hours. And we left that message on there and prayed that she got it. Next night we got there, tried to place the call, and it took about almost that full 2 hours before that call finally went through and my mother answered. And we said, we're doing good, no problems, didn't go into a lot of details, no sense in doing that. Loren found out at that point that he was a grandfather. His granddaughter had been born late March, and this is now late June. And so that was a big surprise, and then a welcome surprise. And told my mother, okay, this is what we need. This is who you call. This is the lengths. This is the number of splines. This is the number of grooves. When you get, and we had made contact with a guy in the U.S. Embassy there in Khartoum. First of all, the wanted the consulate to, he wasn't going to help us. Can't have anything mailed to the U.S. embassy. And we'd already checked with Sudanese customs, and we had actually a letter from the Sudanese customs saying to have it shipped to the embassy, it would be a lot easier and cheaper if it went right to the embassy than through Sudanese customs. And this guy wouldn't even look at it. And Lauren says, I want to speak to your boss. So we were taken upstairs to see his boss. His boss says, here's my name, here's my address. Just make sure it's only my name on the box. I'll know it's for you. Have it sent to me. We said, fine. Told my mother the address and everything. And the next day, Lauren said, I don't like the Jeep sitting out there all by herself. She's come too far and she means too much to just be sitting there all by herself. I can't bear to have something happen to her at this point. He said, I'm going to buy supplies and I'm going to go back out. So he bought about 6 weeks worth of supplies, took the train back to Wadi Halfa, and hired a local there to take him upriver to where the Jeep was. And that's where he stayed. That's what happened. I don't know other than reading his journals, but, because once he left, I had no idea. I had no communications with him. And I was staying with an American family there in Khartoum. 11 days after my mother posted those axle shafts, I had them in my hand. However, the Blue and the White Nile converge at Khartoum. There were rains in the highlands of Ethiopia, rains in the south of Sudan, and both the Blue and White Nile went into flood stage. It was the highest the river had been since like 1940 something, and the railroad tracks north to Khartoum, or north to Wadi Halfa, had been washed out. So now I'm stuck in the city with no way out. I started knocking on doors. I started with, businessmen. Well, first of all, I started with the railroad. They kept leading me on like it was going to be fixed right away. And I'd go down every day, and every day they'd tell me no. Well, then after 3 or 4 or 5 days of this, I finally said, well, when is it going to be fixed? I've got to talk to somebody. So they finally let me talk to somebody. And like I said, this is now late June. He says, oh, probably sometime near December. I said, okay, good to know. Plan B. Okay. No. And I started knocking on doors. Government offices, U.S. government tried them. They weren't much help. United Nations programs that were helping out with relief supplies. And then after about, I'm going to guess a good 2 weeks of doing this, I was put in touch with the United Nations Development Program that was doing work there. And they said they had the use of a Belgium C-130 Hercules that was going to fly to Wadi Halfa the next morning with relief supplies, and I could be on board. They said, be out on this corner here, these 2 streets at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was out there at, 6 o'clock in the morning, and was flown up to Wadi Halfa in a C-130. And when I got off the plane, there was a man there. He was the shell agent for the shell gas, because of the ferries that run between Egypt and Wadi Halfa. And he had a letter from Lauren. Lauren had gotten a letter out to him addressed to me, and he was there. He knew this plane was coming in, and he was there to give it to the pilot to take back, see if they could get it to me. He was at what was going on. Why was it taking so long? But Lauren said he kind of suspected something was amiss because he could see the river had changed. The river was now literally like, how chocolate milk is thicker than water?
Yes.
That's about what the river looked like. And just that consistency of being that thick and that color of chocolate milk. And that's what the river looked like. So what
an amazing amount of trust for Lauren with you, knowing that he had prepared for 6 weeks, but there's no communication. It's either you're coming back or you're not, or he's got to repeat the trip.
Right.
And the serendipity of him having the forethought to send a letter to you because he heard of the transport, and you happen to run into the guy when you land to get that letter is amazing.
Yeah. And I hired the Mubarak was the name of the shell agent. I hired somebody through him to take me back upriver to where Lauren was. Got there the next day, stayed the night in Wadi Halfa, got there the next day. Lauren had lost probably 30 pounds. I mean, he looked like a great suntan, but practically just bones, because he cut back on his food. He was just getting concerned with his food that he wasn't going to, because he didn't know what was going on. So he had cut back on his food rations.
How many weeks was this between when you separated to getting back
I
there?
don't remember exactly. I just know from the time we broke down to the time we were repaired and moving was 70 days. So just over 2 months.
Mm.
So, and most of that time was him out there by himself. I mean, it was, we had, yeah, it was, it was a long time. And like he said, it was changing the, what do you call it? The free floating axles. You don't even jack the Jeep up. You just undo those 6 bolts, take that hub flange off, take the axle shaft off, put the new one in, put the same flange on or put a new flange on, tighten up the 6 bolts, you're good to go. We were down for 70 days for that job. And it was 36 miles, and 4.5 hours later, we were on a tarred road in Egypt. And we
Now
knew from
Egypt's a
that point
little,
on, we'd be on a road.
but even getting on the tarred road's not half the battle because Egypt had you had something with the title or this you called it a package getting into Egypt. There was
Right.
documentation.
There's a lot of foreign countries require a bond be posted in order for you to bring a car or a vehicle into their country because they want to make sure they get their fair share of taxes if you decide to sell the car there. So what they developed was this thing called a carnet. I don't know, years ago you could get it from AAA, and you posted X amount of dollars of what your vehicle was worth in a bank account, and that was then payable to AAA and to Loren. And that way, if you never exported your car out of a country, AAA would be contacted, and then they would send the money to that country and say, here's your money for taxes, because obviously the car wasn't exported because it doesn't show up on the paperwork. So Loren had a carnet for the Jeep, and in big red letters, and I'm talking a stamp as big as a silver dollar or more, on all over the front page and on every page inside in big red letters, not valid in Egypt. Egypt required a 3,000 or 300% deposit, and he was not going to post that much. He needed the money for the trip, not for the deposit. So this was not valid in Egypt. And so when we got to Egypt, we're totally ignorant. We're not going to say a word. Mum's the word as far as we're concerned. And because we weren't checked into the country legally until we got to Aswan, which was, I don't know how many miles further up into the country, because that's where the ferry boat leaves to go to Wadi Halfa. So there's nothing down below for tourists. It's all just, you can go down to Abu Simbel and visit the temple, but there's no offices there. So we didn't get checked in till we got to Aswan, and we were going through the rigmarole, and we showed up at the place, and we handed over this, and it's a big book. It's like 11 by 17, 11 by 14, I guess, pages. They're big. And it's a book. And you handed it to him, and we're just saying, okay, please, 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 please. And he takes it, and I don't know, they do something, and he says, and they speak relatively good English. He says, well, you're going to have to come back tomorrow. We can't finish this. It's too late today. Okay. So we come back tomorrow, and they verify the VIN number and this, that, and the other thing. And then they stamp our carnet, and they give us our carnet, and they give us a license plate. That Egypt required that we have a Egyptian license plate. And we get a license plate for the Jeep, and we are legally in the country, even though it says not valid. They could speak English, but they couldn't read English. Oh, that was a tough one for us. We held our breath a lot on that one.
Yeah. And so Egypt is relatively easier to travel through, and you're going now to
Yeah, Egypt
the
was
Atlantic
good.
Ocean.
I mean, I think it was tarred road the whole way. We went up the Red Sea Road instead of following the Nile, because there's so many towns along the Nile River and the road that follows the Nile that it would just be one town after another. So we went over to the Red Sea, and it was much more scenic and peaceful and easier to find a place to camp and that sort of thing. And we went over towards the Red Sea and followed the Red Sea up, and then cut across to Cairo, which, that may have not been the best thing, because we had to almost go through all the way through Cairo. Cairo was, I think, 15 million people when we were there.
Mm.
And every single one of them drove something. It could have been a bus, it could have been a truck, it could have been a garbage truck, it could have been a bicycle, it could have been an ox cart, but everybody drove something. Oh, traffic was horrendous. And of course, the pyramids are on the west bank, and you have to get over onto the west side of the Nile. And we stayed, there was a beautiful campground out by the pyramids that we stayed at. And before we got out there, we went into a little shop there in Cairo, and I went into one store with lights, electricity, refrigeration. I was able to buy hot, cold stuff, fresh stuff, dry stuff, everything, all in one little tiny little shop. And I thought, oh, I'm in heaven. This is great because I'm not in the marketplace bartering with everybody, not knowing exactly or how fresh things are. And that night after we made camp, there was a overland truck that came in from England. Well, the truck is based there in Cairo. They fly the clientele into Cairo. This overland truck that holds 20 people goes and picks them up. And then they take them down to Abu Simbel. And then they put them on the ferry, they fly them. Then they bring them back to Aswan and they fly them to Kenya or Tanzania. Kenya first, I guess. And then there's another truck that meets them down there. And then they go down through Kenya and Tanzania and then eventually down into South Africa. Whereas the truck that's in Egypt just stays there. Well, anyway, they had their 20 clientele and they said, we were camped right next to them. They said, do you want to go into the city with us for dinner tonight? We're going to go into not a McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, a Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's what it was. We're going to go into Kentucky Fried Chicken for dinner tonight. We said, sure. So we climbed in the back of the truck and we're going through the west side of the pyramids and that area over to somewhere to go for dinner. And this one young gal, she was probably about 19 or 20, and she was looking out the back of the truck. She said, oh, it's so dirty here. It's so nasty. These people are so poor. This is awful. And I said, if you think this is bad, you may as well just get back on the plane and go back to England because this is good. This is good. This is the cream of the cream. It's going to get a lot worse when you go south. And I said, my thought is, aren't you traveling to experience these things anyway? I mean, isn't if it's like home, why are you leaving? If you want it to look like your front door or your front yard, why are you going to leave?
Yeah, stay home.
yeah. So anyway, I often wonder how she survived her trip through Africa. But yeah, we stayed out there, and then it was back across from Cairo to the Suez Canal and under the Suez Canal. Into Sinai, through the Sinai, and into Egypt, into Israel. And there we ran into our first major roadblock that was caused by human nature, not Mother Nature.
Yeah, and this you said was probably one of the tougher parts for Loren with this.
Yeah, because again, it was political. It was all political. The two countries, Israel and Jordan, were technically at war, even though there was no fighting. It was just something on paper. And we were told by the Jordanian people that we spoke to, they said, well, we have to live in this part of the world. So that's why we at that time, don't have relations with Israel. They're an Arabic country and they needed to maintain their sovereignty. So they just said, okay, fine, Israel's we're at war with them, even though there was nothing happening. So we worked at trying to get the Jeep to Jordan by land. The only other option was to go through Lebanon, and this was 3 or 5 years after the Marine Corps barracks bombing in Beirut. So we knew driving a big red Jeep with California license plates was probably not the wisest move. So we knew that Jordan was where we needed to get to, and we ended up talking with UN embassy people, some tourist agencies that we were referred to, travel agencies. And the UN, we said, look, you can paint it white, put a big blue UN on it, and you drive it across the bridge, across the Jordan River, and we'll get across some other way. We can fly or go down to go back into Egypt and fly, or go back into Egypt and take the ferry, and then we'll come up the other side. They said, we can't even drive our vehicles across, the government vehicles across the bridge. We have to we're driven up to the bridge, we get out, we walk across the bridge, and we're picked up by another government vehicle. We said, okay, that's not going to work. So, and we knew we needed to move on because we were headed to Norway and it was getting later in the year. And so that was a hard one to leave that area behind because we had to go back into Egypt at that point and take a ferry up to Aqaba, Jordan, and then continue on. So there was that water break in there of, I don't know, a few hours from Nuweiba, Egypt into Aqaba, Jordan. And then we went up and went through Petra and a few of the other ruins going up, and then into Syria and Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. And we were to pick up our paperwork to enter the Soviet Union because it's still Soviet Union. And we had prearranged in Cairo at their official tourist agency. The Soviet tourist agency is known as Intourist. And our paperwork was not there. They never heard of us at the one in Romania. And we said, okay, fine. We're not, and they said it'll take about 2 weeks. We said, well, we're not going to, this was middle of October or getting towards the end of October. We said, well, we're not going to wait here 2 weeks and then go up to Norway in November. That's just the wrong time of year to do this. So Loren says, we're just going to go to ground. And we drove over to England. He was able to find through the Land Rover Club of England, get a connection to a farm where he could park the Jeep in a building. And basically they had a little separate room there and he could just stay right there in the building and stay on the property. And he stayed there near Canterbury. I went back to the States and wrote letters looking for sponsorship. We did get products, but that was about it. And which, everything helps. And then in May, I flew back. We took back off across back to Calais, France. And then we went through, Belgium, the Netherlands. And then at that time, it was West Germany, East Germany, and Poland, and then into the Soviet Union. And yeah, the Soviet Union was definitely an eye-opener because when I grew up, it was a world power. Their U.S. and Soviet Union were world powers. Well, we found out that they have a third world country with a first world army. That was it. There were so many things that didn't work there. And you had to turn your passport in when you checked in at your campground for the night, and then you had to get it back in the morning. And if you checked into a motel, you had to check your passport at the hotel desk, and then you got it back. So yeah, the Soviet Union was definitely an eye-opener. The people, without a doubt, super friendly. This is during Gorbachev and Reagan, of course. And of course, having California plates, they all want to know if we knew Reagan. Loren says, yeah, I had lunch with him yesterday. I mean, what is this? So yeah, and Loren, when we entered the Soviet Union, Loren made not necessarily a mistake, but he wanted to get photographs of us entering the Soviet Union at the border crossing. And they won't allow most third world countries won't allow you to take a photograph at the border. And he said he'd like to get a picture, and he said, no, you can't. Well, go ask your boss. So this young soldier goes in and comes back out. And he says, no, you can't. We can't. So Loren says, well, look, we're on this trip. It's really important. We're trying to document it, blah, blah. Go ask your boss again. So I think the third time that the guy went in to ask his boss, the boss probably said, no, you're going to search him now. So they actually took us into a separate building where we drove over a pit, and they got underneath and they could look at everything underneath the vehicle. And then they went through everything in the vehicle, and they wanted to know if we had any firearms, and we said no. And we're talking with them. I mean, they're two young soldiers. They're nice young men. And we're talking back and forth, and they said no firearms. And then all of a sudden, this guy says, oh, pistol. And he pulls out this plastic bag with what looks like a pistol in it. And Loren says, no, it's a timing light. So he opens it up. Sure enough, it's the timing light for the engine. So yeah, okay. But it was definitely interesting. The people were very friendly. I'd ask a cab driver next to us. We couldn't find our way out of Moscow. They don't give you a city map. They give you, quote unquote, a map of the country, of the roads you can drive on. And if you're familiar with national park maps, it looks a lot like a national park map, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're correct. Well, anyway, we couldn't find our way out of Moscow. And so I was asking, and it's, 4 and 5 lanes wide. And I asked this taxi driver, and he says, yeah. So as the light turns, he throws a handful of candy in my window. So we get up to the next traffic light and we're stopped next to each other. And I'm looking through the glove box to see what I can pass to him. And I found a whole pack of gum and I threw the pack of gum in his window and their thumbs up, Americans. We'd have cars honk their horns and pass us and then stop further up the road. And they'd all be out with cameras to take pictures as we go down the road. So yeah, they were very, very friendly. We got lost in Leningrad and the Soviet Navy was there and they helped us find our way out of there. That was another one. But it was then from Soviet Union, it was into Finland. And then I think did we cross a little bit of Sweden and then into Norway, I think, the way the countries are aligned there. And we had no idea where we were ending. Again, no internet to check where the furthest road north is. And so we're just going north, literally following our noses going north. And we'd stop in a town and we'd check with the police station and ask, is there another town further north? And, okay, next one, and then the next one. And finally, this one little town said, yeah, there's a little fishing village further north, but the road isn't really that good. It was just a dirt road that was more or less one lane. And then, but pretty straight, not you're well above the Arctic Circle, so there's not much vegetation. With little pullouts so that if a car's coming, you could pull off into a pullout and let the cars come. So you had to always be watching well ahead as if somebody was coming. So sure enough, that's where we took off for Gamvik, Norway, and got there and found out that the road even went a little bit further north than the village to a lighthouse, just a few, probably half a mile north of the village. And that's where we officially ended the trip, was at the Gamvik lighthouse. On the 4th of July, Loren said, we're going to finish on a good old American holiday. We've taken one American-made vehicle around the world. We're going to do it on an American holiday. So we actually held up for a day so that we could do this on the 4th of July. Then because we had gone to Tierra del Fuego in South America, we went ahead and splurged and spent the money and went to the island of North Cape in Norway, which now has a bridge to it. But it is further north than where Gamvik lies. But again, it's an island, so you had to take a ferry to get there when we were there. And we went as far north on the island that we could go. And
what were your emotions at that time? What was the emotion getting to that lighthouse? Like, you've been on this trip for years now. What were the emotions?
I remember writing in my journal, Loren was like a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. It was just full of excitement, just full of excitement that he just couldn't contain himself, that he was finally done with it and done with it. But Israel, Jordan was still there. That what we called the final mile was still there. And that one took us until 2018 before we finally were able to ship the Jeep back and drive from Israel, from a road we were on in Israel, to the road we were on in Jordan, turn around and come back into Israel with the Jeep, with the sand ship. I don't even think I mentioned her name. Her name's the Sand Ship Discovery. So she's now had all 4 wheels on terra firma around the world, except for the South Atlantic.
Wow, Patty, that's absolutely amazing. And while we're wrapping up here, there's just so much that has happened, and to condense it into a small time is really difficult. But looking back on your experience, if you had any advice to give anyone or anything you'd like to share that you've learned from this experience, what would it be?
Open the door and get out there. Just go see what's there. Don't be afraid. Somebody was on Facebook the other day. They want to go along the Camino del Diablo, which is right along the Arizona-Mexican border towards Yuma. And they have to sign a waiver, and they're really worried they have to sign this waiver to do this. Well, they have to sign the waiver because it's a U.S. bombing range. That's why they have to sign the waiver. It's not because it's along the Mexican border, and it's a heavily patrolled area by the U.S. government. We've been through there. We've been buzzed by the helicopters to make sure that we were legit. So yeah, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's a safe area. I don't know. I just don't like letting things stop me if it's something I want to do.
Yeah.
Like I said, you prioritize what you want in life. You figure out what that is. You work towards it. You save your money for that. You build things for that, and that's what you go for. And that's what life's about, is to enjoy it.
Yeah. Now, I know, so just to bring everyone up to the speed now. So, unfortunately, Loren passed a few years ago.
Yes, it was a year ago this past August.
This past August. And what's next for the SS Discovery? What's looking forward here? You're getting your story out there and
Right, trying to get her story out there as much as possible. And I traveled this past summer to 5 overland shows, overland expos, and Jeep fests across the U.S. Again, getting her story out there. So many people have heard of other expeditions, the 4 or 5 Jeeps that went through in '79. They all think that we were part of that, and we weren't. Because they'll say, "Oh, we saw the movie on YouTube." No, that wasn't us. Sorry. And so yeah, it's just getting this story out there. So many people have never heard of it, which yeah, we haven't done that much with it. And I want to get her story out there. I want to get the Jeep out there. I want to showcase her, give slideshows to advertise what we've done, what you can do. Just don't let things hold you back. I mean, you got to be smart, but you don't have to be absolutely paranoid. And this summer, I've got another whole summer planned. I'll be doing, I think, a total of 10 maybe events from British Columbia all the way over to Arlington, Virginia, and back. So I'll be towing the Jeep and setting her up at various overland rallies, overland expos, that sort of thing. And then I am going to, I have an invitation to put her in a museum in Manhattan, Kansas. And that may be for maybe 6 months. We'll see how it does, and go from there. Because again, I want her story out there where people can see her and read about her.
well, thank you for sharing your story, Patty. In the podcast here, I'll leave all your contact information. So if you'd like to be a part of this story and continue to keep this amazing trip alive, please check out the comments. You can contact and support Patty there. And Patty, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
for
Josh.
this
I really
amazing
appreciate
stories.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Best of wishes to you and take care.
Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Great Things LLC podcast. If you did, be sure to share the link with this episode with your friends and share it to your social media with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Great Things LLC. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. There's so much more to come. You can support me by leaving a rating and a review of the show, and that will help others to find their purpose, dream, collaborate, and create their own success story. Until next time, this is Josh Meter, your host, signing off.